Hi, I'm Charlie Humbert, and for my leadership discussion, I chose to do human rights and immigration into the United States. So, what is immigration? It's the movement of people living in one country to another, and it's been a fundamental aspect of human history. But back in the day, it was just as controversial as it is today because it's been in the news, within the past year quite a bit. So, so some history about it. It didn't really begin until the 1700s when the United States became an independent nation. And before that, African people were brought over as slaves and European people came over as settlers. And once the U.S. Constitution was formed, immigrants kind of flocked with few restrictions. But the American people that were already here resented the presence in immigrants that were Irish, Catholic, Italian, and Chinese, as we're going to see. The early settlers really resented the presence of Asian immigrants. So some of the early immigration ports that were in the United States was Ellis Island, which was in between New York and New Jersey, and that saw millions of immigrants pass through its doors. And in fact, it's been estimated that close to 40% of American citizens today can trace like an ancestor to Ellis Island. And on the other side of the country, it was Angel Island, which was in California near Alcatraz. And that was obviously the immigration port for lots of Asian immigrants seeking the new land in America. But this one was home to a lot more like persecution and oppression, as some 175,000 Chinese immigrants and about 60,000 Japanese immigrants were detained in under oppressive conditions, and they were generally held from a couple weeks to 6 months before being actually allowed to enter into America. And so if you could see here, the red circle just zeroed in on the United Nations Human Rights number 2, which says we have the right to be free from discrimination. And so my thought process with picking that human right was the question that came up of why and when did it become illegal to immigrate into a place, or to be an illegal immigrant, essentially. And so, until the late 19th century, there wasn't any such thing as illegal or legal immigration. But the first federal law governing who could and couldn't enter the country was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which came about when many Western people attributed the economic hardship and ills to the Chinese people immigrating into the United States. There was the idea behind the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was essentially to limit Asian immigration and maintain some sort of like white racial purity within the country. And so, more immigration laws started to emerge, and in 1917, the Asiatic Barred Zone Act was created, which essentially limited most Asian immigrants, but also it limited immigrants that were prostitutes, polygamists, anarchists, and people with contagious diseases. So, that was a big one. But then 7 years later, the Immigration Act of 1924 was introduced by Calvin Coolidge, which was the most stringent immigration policy at the time, which this was coming at a time where World War I had passed, and Americans were kind of fighting the communist ideas that were surrounding the world, and we wanted to more so isolate ourselves from those beliefs. Many Americans saw like an enormous influx of largely unskilled and uneducated immigrants during the early 1900s as sort of a threat to jobs and like land around the country. So more thoughts on the Immigration Act of 1924. It introduced numerical caps and quotas on the amount of immigrants that we would allow into our country, and it gave tremendous preference to immigrants from Northern and Western Europe as opposed to Southern and Eastern. We early on tended to discriminate more against the Southern and Eastern Europeans because, as we see, this really did nothing to Asian immigration because, as we saw, most of the immigrants coming into our country were already European and they were not Asian people. So there a lot of that like oppression was kind of useless because there weren't a lot of Asian immigrants to begin with. But this sort of gave rise to just like a lot of fear. Like we made the Immigration Act of 1924 because we wanted to help like the fear that was going around about too many non-white Anglo-Saxon residents in our country. And so, yeah, immigration law today. In 1965, the Hart-Celler Immigration Act was passed, which officially put a numerical cap and quota on Mexican immigrants entering into the United States. And so, yeah, as of 1965, whole groups of Mexican and Latin American immigrants who, previous to this act being passed, would have been legal, all of a sudden just became illegal, just like that. And even more recent, in 2017, Attorney General Jeff Sessions made the decision to end DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, essentially giving people who came into the U.S. as undocumented immigrants as children a legal avenue to be legal residents. And so, yeah, this will kind of transition me into our discussion questions, because as we've seen in the past, immigration has increasingly become tighter and more, just strict with our policies. And so my discussion questions kind of revolve around that, in that they go hand in hand. Like, what is the intersection between immigration law and human rights? And also, are we as the United States violating any essential human rights that are restricting the amount of immigrants we have and let into our country? So thank you for listening. I'm excited to just hear your thoughts and comments and answer any questions you guys have. Thank you.